Hello and welcome to another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, a first responder mental health podcast. I'm your host, Erin Jane. And I wanted to jump on today and just talk about the fact that we are in the month of June. We're almost halfway through the year. And June is an important month for a couple of reasons. One of them being the fact that it is Men's Health Awareness Month, and also the fact that it is PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder awareness month as well. So given, the nature of what I do and what this podcast is about, I thought it would be good to just jump on and acknowledge it and sort of just let you know that, this month I'm trying to showcase the stories of men in particular. Obviously, a lot of the guests I do interview, just the nature of first responder positions, a lot of them are male, but I think I kind of just wanted to showcase some more of those this month, just to show that, it's important that men talk about their mental, physical, and emotional health, and what a difference that the conversation is making, because I believe that it is. And I'll get to, some of my reasons for that a little bit later. But yeah, firstly, so last week, so this should be episode 31. So last week was episode 30, and I interviewed the lovely Justin Cott from Washington State. So yeah, he was the first male guest that I wanted to showcase in the month of June. And yeah, I wanted to talk about the fact that it is post-traumatic stress disorder awareness month. And, that's something that kind of comes up a lot in, the population of first responders and emergency services members. And, I'm not here to speak out of turn. I don't have that diagnosis. And I'm not a clinician or a medical professional. Obviously, anyone who has been listening knows I am studying psychology in the hope to one day be a clinician and be able to help people suffering from it. But just to say that, anything I talk about or anything like that, in regards to a diagnosis, it's not anecdotal, but in terms of, if there's anything that I say that could be wrong, because, I am human and can fuck up occasionally, speak to a clinician, speak to someone who 100% can guide you on the right path. If I say something that is conflicting, I get my information from either my textbooks or, psychological resources online and all that kind of thing. But that's just my sort of disclaimer at the beginning. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to, acknowledge that, post-traumatic stress, and whether you are comfortable calling it a disorder, there has been a bit of a push to call it an injury. In the last few years, some people like that, some people don't. I think it's sort of, when it comes to the DSM-5, which is like the diagnostic manual, which is where the clinical description comes from, it's considered a disorder. But yeah, equally that, sometimes people feel a little labeled by, being given, the diagnosis of a quote unquote disorder. So I understand there's like a lot of conjecture about it, and even sort of more recently I've sort of seen it kind of going from being referred to as a disorder or or like an injury, which a lot of people were pushing for a little while there, changing it to just simply post-traumatic stress and literally just referring to it as that. Yeah. So, post-traumatic stress, it's something that's obviously, very prevalent in our population, and really sort of, I think anyone who is in this community and has been sort of keeping their eye on really anything in regards to the mental health challenges that first responders face. The research shows that 70% of adults will experience at least one traumatic incident or event in their lifetime. And that's just like an average adult. We're not talking about, people who have endured any kind of childhood trauma or anything like that. So just your kind of Joe Blow, average person, at least one, maybe one or two in the span of, say, a 20-year first responder or emergency services career, you will be exposed easily to between 300 and 400 traumatic events that you will attend, that you will, vicariously listen to, perhaps as, like a dispatcher or something like that. And that's a lot. It's a heavy burden to wrestle with. And when it comes to, the general population of the people who have maybe one or two traumatic events that they are exposed to, 20% of that 70% will go on to develop PTSD, which whatever you're comfortable referring to it as. Whereas 33% of the first responder population will go on to develop post-traumatic stress and to have experience, the symptoms and of that. It's a lot. It's really it's something that's obviously, affecting our population significantly. And again, it's why I'm sort of, on the path to study what I want to study. And, that sort of diagnosis is also roughly in line with even just like the overall, mental and behavioral health differences between the general population and the first responder and emergency services populations, that roughly 20% of someone who is a civilian, so 1 in 5 people, will experience a mental health challenge at, some point in their life, whereas 30% of first responders will. So the stats don't lie, unfortunately. And, we all talk about trauma and PTSD and all that kind of thing. And sometimes, we also don't even necessarily know, like, with all the shit that we see at work, like what trauma actually is considered, because, and then, I guess like each department might have a different like criteria for what, is defined as a critical incident. And then more often than not, like a critical incident will generally have some kind of like, trauma or like high impact basis to it. So I've not gonna lie, like I got it off the internet. I researched it. So mainly just so I could give you like an accurate description and explanation of what trauma is actually considered when it comes to like a clinical term. So I'm going to read it. Sorry, forgive me. So trauma is an experience that causes intense physical, emotional, and psychological stress reactions. So obviously both, in your body and in your mind. And it results from exposure to an incident or an event or a series of events that an individual perceives as physically or emotionally disturbing, harmful, or threatening. So, that can kind of be basically described as like, an everyday shift in a cop or a firefighter or paramedics, life, unfortunately. And so, it boils down to like a threat of death, a threat of serious injury, either to themselves or someone else, or bearing witness to that. So that is what a, traumatic experience, or basically overall umbrella of trauma, is considered to be. And so, like I said, that, I'm not a clinician, but, in order to ascertain whether you do have PTSD, you do have to go and see a clinician and get that diagnosis. And so again, I've looked up the DSM-5, which again is like the diagnostic tool, to be able to receive treatment under that, what am I thinking of? Under that diagnosis from a mental health professional. So post-traumatic stress disorder, it's when someone experiences an exposure to death, or like a personal death threat, serious injury or sexual violence, and whether directly, like it's happened to them, whether they've witnessed it, whether it's happening to a loved one, and which is the part that sort of primarily comes into play for us, during professional duties. So obviously, police officers, firefighters, AMBOs, paramedics, EMS, EMT, corrections, dispatchers, nurses, doctors. I'm sure I'm leaving someone out, but during your professional duties, like this is what we do. This is what we do on a daily basis, and might not necessarily be daily, but it's definitely weekly. And depending on how long your career is, you are going to be exposed to a number of these kind of incidents, and therefore being human and having some kind of physiological or psychological response, it just means that it means that you have been exposed to something. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. It means that you're just reacting and responding, and that's it. There's nothing wrong with it. And so when it comes to a diagnosis, and I'm just putting it out there because sometimes people don't know. People don't actually know what a diagnosis means, or like what the criteria is. So this is just for information purposes. So under the DSM-5, someone can receive a diagnosis if they experience the following for more than 1 month. So it's a natural human response to be affected by things sometimes, okay? And so it's actually like a healthy thing for your body to be doing sometimes, to be responding and reacting to something that you are exposed to. So within that 4-week initial period, you can experience a lot of these sorts of symptoms. And if it's generally within that first 4-week period, it's considered what's called acute stress disorder, or acute stress syndrome. So it's like that initial stress that happens after the exposure or the witnessing of an event or an incident or a series of incidents. So when it comes to PTSD, you've experiencing the following symptoms for 1 month or more. So one or more intrusion symptom, which is like flashbacks, nightmares, all that kind of thing. 1 or more symptom of avoidance. 2 or more symptoms that affect your mood, and your thinking and your cognition. And 2 or more arousal and reactivity symptoms and that have begun after the exposure to the trauma and weren't present before it. So that's it. So that is not for me to, comment on in regards to the criteria. It's basically just for an information purpose for anyone listening who is like, I've heard of trauma, I've heard of PTSD, PTSI, but I've just never actually really known what it means to be diagnosed or what the symptomology is. So if you have any questions, you can obviously do your own research. When it comes to calling it PTS, PTSD, PTSI, I think it's, there's reasons why it's called, one thing over another. I sort of, initially liked the idea of calling it an injury instead of like a disorder, especially for sort of this population, because I think it allows that mindset to, I guess, if you get injured, you can overcome an injury. Whereas a disorder can sometimes feel very like exposing and like you're being labeled and that you are quote unquote disordered and that, you're going to be stuck with this for the rest of your life. I've heard other people say that they hate the idea of the injury label. Again, I think it's whatever you're most comfortable with. But basically, I think if you are experiencing any of the symptoms that I mentioned, or there's an incident, that felt traumatic and you're still thinking about it days, weeks, months, years later, all I can advocate for is going and speaking to someone. Speak to your PCP, speak to a mental health clinician, get a referral, whatever it is that you need. Speak to someone, because you don't have to live in a disordered way. There is so much help out there available, and especially for the first responder community. And there is a growing trend of culturally competent therapists, mental health clinicians, obviously I do coaching, but PTSD is above my pay grade. So it's important that you go and speak to the right people and get the right kind of help and learn the skills, learn the coping mechanisms that are going to help you through it and help you navigate it. So I think it's important to draw attention to it, especially as the month of June is PTSD Awareness Month. And obviously, spoken to lots of people on this podcast in regards to them living with it. As a result of some of the things that they experienced at work, during the course of their career and their profession. And it's not to say that it's right or that, oh, well, this is what you signed up for, because that's fucking nonsense. But with the right help, progress and wellness is possible. So that's sort of what I want to advocate for. And, I guess I speak about it a little bit on here, and it's definitely something that I feel passionately about, and it's kind of more in the realm of where I would fall in terms of helping coach people or anything like that. Or even, I went through the CISM training about 12 months ago now. It's about being proactive and preventative. So you can't, the nature of our jobs, you can't pick and choose whether you're exposed to shitty things at work, because that is part of our job. And, you can have a rough week where you've got something awful every single day. You can go for a month and everything's cruisy and, nothing bothers you. It's a bit all over the place. And that's, again, part of the nature of our job. But being proactive and being preventative in my eyes is about making sure that you have access to someone who is culturally competent. It is learning to get comfortable speaking to someone about the things that you see at work, or finding an avenue where you healthily and, I think consciously process some of the things that you see and some of the things that you experience, because that can help. It helps it go from, that initial exposure to ending up somewhere further down the track where you do need that kind of help. So it can't always prevent it, but when we have, healthy healthy relationships and healthy coping skills and processes already in place, I think it can help alleviate it and maybe not make it as bad as what it could end up being. So that's just my 2 cents on it. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about today is the fact that it is Men's Health Awareness Month, which also obviously entails men's mental health awareness. And I guess it might sound sort of counterintuitive to be a female and wanting to talk about men's mental health. And like, I get that, you could be listening and going, what the fuck would she know? And that's a fair enough assumption. But I look at it like, when it comes to women's issues, quote unquote, women's issues. So, whether it's the prevalence of rape, sexual assault, abortion rights, anything like that like sort of, will typically affect women more than it affects men. Men are encouraged to speak up and join the conversation. I spoke a few weeks ago about the conversation of the man versus bear flying around the internet. Men lending their voices to issues that affect women is encouraged. And I think that the same can be said for women lending their voice for issues that affect men. And so I look at it as, like the pendulum swings both ways. I am a daughter, I am a sister, I'm a wife, I'm the mother of 2 boys, and the friend to many, many men in my life who I care about. I care about their physical well-being. I care about their mental well-being, their emotional well-being. I care. So the reason that I want to, talk about it is for that very reason, that I don't think any voice should be shut out when it comes to encouraging men to talk about their feelings, talk about shit that they're seeing at work, talk about anything. Don't talk to me about golf, because you might zone out with that, but probably anything else I'll listen to happily. But I think that as well, it's I've sort of talked about it a little bit on here, in amongst other episodes and stuff like that, but or other guests that we've had on and have mentioned about having suicidal ideation and all that kind of thing. That I am the daughter of a man who completed suicide, and it was 1986. So we are talking a long time ago now. And I was 2 years old, and my brother had just turned 5 and my sister was 9. And it's, something that I've, done a lot of years of, I guess, work on, or seeking closure in lots of different ways, and healing from, and, let's be honest, like I was 2 years old. So it's not like I sort of have, many memories or knew him necessarily as a person. A lot of my grief is wrapped around, the loss of never having him in my life. And I can, openly and honestly, talk about that. It's something that definitely sort of shaped my life in a lot of ways. And yeah, something that, I share on here, not to garner any sort of sympathy or anything like that. It's really more just to draw awareness and show that, it happens to a lot more people than, you know, we necessarily know. Like, so I guess in the way that like so many people are touched by suicide. And if I can be a person who someone can go, oh, like, you know, that person lost someone. Like, everyone knows someone. Everyone knows someone. So many people have been touched, and especially in, you know, the first responder emergency services population. Like, you know, it's coming to the point where a lot of us are losing friends and colleagues as a result to suicide. And, you know, it was the 80s, and it's my understanding, and again, I only know this through like secondhand information, but it's my understanding that when my dad was struggling, he reached out to someone who he trusted and respected, sort of for help to acknowledge the fact that he was struggling. And he was met with you know, that sort of shameful, stigmatized response of, man up, get over it, you'll be right. And, you know, I don't hold any ill will towards that person, because that's just how it was back then. And and, you know, who knows, like, mental health was just a different beast back in the 80s. And people didn't know, and especially men weren't encouraged to talk about it. And, you know, that person lost someone too. So I think, we're just one example, you know, and obviously being Men's, you know, Health and Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, like Project Patriot, Project Patriot 22, I think, like I've been sharing like some of their stuff on Instagram, because they've been doing a lot of good stuff. And, you know, I shared something the other day, and it's like, it's not, they, you know, crossed out man up, and it said speak up instead. And, you know, that it resonates, because, you know, we lose too many because they think that they can't talk. And yeah, like I think my dad is an example of that he clearly knew that he was in trouble. And look, I don't know how accurate the story is that I know. I don't know whether he's reached out to other people. You know, I'll never know. But I think part of you know, I guess my journey for healing and closure and all that kind of thing has been about wanting to work towards, or make sure that kind of loss, you know, doesn't happen again. And I know that you can't save everyone, but even just one would be enough, you know. And, you know, for anyone who isn't aware, you know, I used to work as a crisis counsellor for a suicide prevention organization. And, you know, part of the reason I did that is obviously like my history and wanting to help, you know. Like I said, you can't, not always going to be able to save everyone, but, you know, sometimes there were phone calls that were just, you know, pranks, or someone who was just lonely, or, you know, let's be honest, someone just being a creep and wanting to say gross things to you over the phone. But sometimes, you know, you took those really genuine, heartfelt calls, and a lot of them were from men who, you know, calling a crisis line because they didn't feel like they could talk to anyone in their life, or they had no one else to turn to. And that's the whole point of them, you know. So there is someone for them to call or text or interact with, just to either get their feelings out, or, you know, talk about their suicidal ideation, and not have it scare the person on the other end of the line, you know. And that was while I was there, while I was working for that organization, that I ended up speaking at the state suicide conference in Massachusetts. And I was, I think I was 7 months pregnant with my first kid. And I was 31 at the time. And, thinking about my dad, and that's, what I was writing about, and my experience with his loss and all that kind of thing. And I ended up realizing that I was due around my birthday, around my 32nd birthday. And as luck would have it, my beautiful baby boy actually arrived on my birthday. So we get to share that together, which is lovely. But it got me thinking, and I sort of did the mental gymnastics that, multiplication and subtraction is. But, and I came to the realization that I was due to give birth to my first child around the time and being the same age as when my dad chose to end his life. So he was 32 and he had 3 kids, me being the youngest. And it kind of was just a very, it was kind of like a very clarifying time for me, I think, because I can't lie and say that I've never felt anger towards my dad. There's been a lot of anger towards my dad over the years. And a lot of just lack of knowledge and not understanding and all that kind of thing. And then having my first child at the same age that he left, it actually kind of turned any anger or resentment or fear and I don't know, like, I mean, it's hard to quantify all the emotions. But it really just, like, the love that I feel towards my children. And you don't know it until you experience it. And especially as a woman, you grow them, you carry them, you birth them. The love that you feel is intense and powerful and like nothing else, like I love my husband deeply and affectionately and intensely, but the way that you love your children, it's just different. And it made me just think, like, shit, like, how much pain was my dad in for him to feel that love for his kids? Because I knew how much I felt for my children, and I observed my husband the same way, and how much love he felt for our boys. And it really just made me just feel such compassion and empathy for my dad. And it kind of just gave me a certain amount of clarity that, yeah, like, and not just for my dad, but for anyone who's reached that point, and whether they have just struggled with the ideation and taken no action, whether they have taken action and made an attempt, and it was, successful, or whether they survived. All it ever does, there's no judgment. No judgment at all. There's empathy and compassion, and that's it. That's all that there is for someone struggling in that realm. And yeah, that's sort of how I look at what has happened with my dad and how it shaped my life and all that kind of thing. And I just look at it from a place of like, you know, for you to have been in that much pain and that much utter despair, like, I don't hold any grudges. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just really sorry that there wasn't the kind of help available that that clearly he needed. That's really all I think about now. And that's why, you know, I have such respect for so many of the people that are working in this space now, who put their truth out there and put their voice out there. You know, especially the men in this, you know, first responder mental health wellness community who are, you know, speaking out and, you know, putting themselves and their experiences out there in the same way that they just want to help, and they want people to know that there is help and that there is something after being in the depths of despair. If you end up surviving that, which we all hope that you do. So, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to get emotional. I didn't think I would. Rarely happens anymore these days. But hey, if you know me by now, you just got to deal with it. But yeah, so like I said, might be weird having a woman try to speak about men's mental health, but you know, my whole life has been shaped by it. And I am the friend and loved one of you know, many men who battle depression too, and some like severe at times, really severe. And because of, you know, obviously the trust, you know, that they place in me, like I won't sort of, you know, mention them by name or speak about it like a hell of a lot, but I guess just to kind of say that I've had men cry on me, you know, just in complete and utter despair. And not once has it ever made me think of them any differently. Because men get accused and attacked of being weak when they, you know, are vulnerable and show any kind of emotion. And being on the other side of it, it doesn't fucking change our perception of you when you show raw, authentic emotion. It just fucking doesn't. Never, ever, ever have I thought less of someone for them admitting to me that they were struggling. Not once. And I guess as well, you know, like depression and suicidal ideation and anxiety and all that kind of thing, like it obviously presents differently in different people. And, you know, I've had the opposite too. I've had, you know, male friends and loved ones just go quiet on me and like completely disassociate. And, or I can kind of just tell by their disposition, by their facial expression, by, you know, their demeanor that they're putting off, or even just like the language that they use in like a text message that something's off, you know. So it doesn't just have to be someone breaking down in tears, but if I sense something's off, I'm always going to ask, you know. And I think the most like important thing for me is that it's a privilege when someone knows that I'm there for them. And especially for a man to know that, because I know that it can be really hard to open up to a woman sometimes. And, you know, it's a sincere privilege for me to think that they know that I'm a safe person for them. And I will never step away from that, never back down from it. I always want that to be an option for any of the men in my life. And even, you know, the ones that I don't know, who, you know, might come to me in like a professional capacity. And, you know, it's not like I haven't seen men break down and cry during coaching sessions too. Yet again, never, ever changes my perception of them. Because there's nothing fucking wrong with experiencing emotions. And I know sometimes we've got to turn them off at work, but if we don't process it, it's going to eat away at you. So, you know, whether someone wants to talk to me, cry on me, you know, if you're really close, like, you know, you might get away with yelling at me, if it's for a good purpose, you know, or you just want to sit in silence, you know, whatever it is that person needs. I think it's important to be able to give it to them, and I'm hopeful that I'm in a position to do that for people that I care about. But, you know, fast forward 30 something years, and, you know, just talking about the loss of my dad and how the conversation wasn't there, you know, and when he reached out for help wasn't there for him. And 30 years later, the conversation is changing. And, you know, we still have like a way to go. And I think we all know that, but the tide is turning. And it's not where it should be, you know, and yeah, it's fucking 30 years too late, but it's getting there. And the way that I look at this podcast and, you know, I like to call it my darkness community. It's proof. The guests that have come on here are proof that the tide is turning, because many of the guests have been men. And, you know, they come on here and they share their stories. And, you know, you've got men like Michael Seguri came on, and Chris Luttrell, and they both talked openly about their, you know, experiencing suicidal ideation. That wasn't happening 30 years ago. And, you know, Navy veteran and firefighter Chucky, he came on and talked about some of his experiences and the fact that he's really open and vocal about being in therapy, and that he's had people come up to him at work and say, thank you for sharing it, because knowing that you were in therapy made me know that it was okay. That shit was not happening around a firehouse table 30 years ago. And equally, Keith Hanks, former firefighter, and he came on and, you know, so graciously talked about, you know, the fact that he had multiple suicide attempts, multiple. The last one being with a firearm, you know, and to be a man who puts yourself out there when you have a wife and a child at home and you talk about the fact that you tried to end your life, like that shit's not fucking easy. And Keith is out there doing it. And actually just saw the other day, he talked about writing a book when he was on the podcast, and he's finished it, and I believe it is out and available to purchase. So please go check out Keith's book. So Keith Hanks, I believe it's called Alan. And I encourage anyone who's interested to hear his story, because it's a really powerful one to purchase it and or reach out to him and see where you can get a copy, because I think it'd be really, really worthwhile. And equally there are so many men in this space, in this first responder mental health and wellness space, that are out there working so hard to actively change the conversation. And I think one of the best advocates that I know for that is Travis Gribble from My Arena. And he tours around and speaks with gives like a presentation with like equal parts with him and his therapist Jen, and they give this presentation about what he was experiencing, so he can speak to it from the first responder in that first person realm. And then Jen gets up and explains the mental health aspects behind it, and like the clinical nature of what was what Travis was going through at the time. And he kindly came on here and shared his experiences. And this is someone who was a former SWAT commander, and he's like that, you want to take one look at him, and he looks like that macho alpha male sort of presence. And he part of his presentations, but he also came on here and had a conversation with me where he unashamedly shed tears when he was talking about rescuing a little girl from a garbage bag, which is one of the defining traumatic incidents from his career that affected him significantly. And that man came in here and spoke about it and shared it, not only with me, but with anyone who took the time to listen. This is the proof. This is evidence that things have changed. And like I said, it's not where it needs to be, but it's getting there. And I have faith that it will. And I have faith that having these conversations and sharing our stories or inviting people on to share their stories, and just being fortunate enough to bear witness and engage in these conversations, I think it helps. I think it helps people to know that they're not alone. And that, I guess, is my hope and my wish behind the people that take the time to listen. So yeah, obviously I haven't mentioned everyone that I've interviewed, but just some of the highlights. And I have a lot of respect for everyone who who took the time to come on and share their stories, because especially from a male perspective, they're leading the charge and leading that force. And these men are current and former first responders, openly, willingly and authentically sharing their experiences and their feelings and their traumas. And like I said, not only just with me, but with us, with anyone who wants to listen. And it's something that's never been encouraged. The stigma surrounding first responder mental health, in particular men. Keep your mouth shut, soldier on, shove it down, ignore it. And it just doesn't fucking work like that. It really, really doesn't. And, you know, I shared a reel today. There's a couple of radio hosts in Australia, Jimmy and Nath. Anyone who follows me on social media, I've shared a couple of them. And one of the guys has sort of started talking about and sharing the fact that he struggles with depression, and that his greatest fear is that he is going to die by suicide one day because he struggles significantly. And he shared, you know, some statistics in terms of like the numbers of you know, suicides that happen. And it sort of made me want to share it, but also, yeah, like look up those numbers and those statistics. So it was in Australia, 8.6 people per day are lost to suicide. In England and Wales, it's 18. In Canada, it's 12. And in the United States, it's 135 people on average every single day. Every single day. And, you know, that obviously encompasses the, you know, one of the most famous stats in our community, and not famous in a good way, the 22 veterans that are dying each day. You know? So it's important. It's important. And I think it's a stat that I share because also, even though more women attempt suicide, more men are successful and complete suicide, because generally they are the ones who choose what would be referred to as more lethal means. So think, especially in this country, think firearm, you know? So more women attempt each year, but more men actually die by suicide. So it's, you know, it's, I think you guys probably know by now how important this is to me and how passionately I feel about it. And I'm, you know, hoping that all of us together in this community can make some kind of a difference, you know. And like I said, it's been Christ, I'm turning 40 next month. So it, you know, this year will have been 38 years. So right now, 37 years since my dad passed away to suicide. So men's mental health needs to be spoken about loudly and not just by men, especially by men, but not just by men. It needs to be spoken about by also the women who love them. And like I said, whether that is by their wives, by their sisters, by their daughters, by their mothers, by their friends, or by complete strangers who just care, who just give a fuck, because there are lots of us out here who do. So, yeah, that is what I wanted to jump on and talk about today. So hoping to bring you some other wonderful conversations with some lovely men this month who want to come on and share some of their experiences and what they're doing in the, mental health realm. So I really look forward to that. Thank you for listening. I feel like I, lie to you guys the start of every podcast that I do on my own, because I always say, hey, just jumping on quickly, and never really seems to be quick. So I apologize for that. I honestly don't, intentionally mislead you. I guess once you get me going on a topic that I care about, it's hard for me to shut up. So I will take that opportunity now. Thank you for listening. If nothing else, I hope you take this opportunity and this month maybe to think about the men who you love in your life and who you care about, and who you would miss if they were gone. And just ask them how they are. Just reach out, even if it's just one man that you love, one man that you care about, someone that you would miss if they were gone tomorrow. Having open, honest conversations matter. Even just being asked matters. Even if you're not struggling, if someone bothers and cares enough to go, hey, are you doing all right? That means something. It means that, someone cares. And I think, in this life, isn't that what matters? That people love us and people care about us. And they'd miss us if we were gone. We're all going to die one day. And, I think the kind of legacy that I would want to leave is that people knew that I cared, and that I spent my life trying to help others. And as I was trying to help, that they knew how much I cared. And whether they were my loved one or someone I was just trying to help, through my work, or I don't know, some random conversation that you end up getting in with someone in, the supermarket line or at the gym or whatever. Just showing that you care is important. It's about it. So, all right, I have kept you long enough. If you have made it to the end, thank you. I wish there was some kind of prize, but there's not. But yeah, thank you for listening. This has been another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, a first responder mental health podcast. I've been your host, Erin Jane. And as always, let me listen in a way you've never been heard. Cheers.